doc that we will be using a little bit this morning. So you could see if you could find that. And then this morning, what I'm going to be doing is telling a story really about how seed saving most likely began. Of course, we don't know because it was a really, really long time ago. And I'd like you to listen for reasons that it's important to save seed today. And if you hear one of those reasons, just make a little note on your paper or in your journal about why it's important. And we'll be sharing those reasons at the end of the presentation. And then just so that we're on the same page, because this is a really diverse group. I mean, there are 5-year-olds to 18-year-olds, there are teachers, there are parents, there are people that are experienced gardeners and seed savers, there are people that are just getting started in seed saving. So just so that we're all on the same page, I'm gonna put a little question in the chat box, and you can see what is a seed and why do plants make seed? So the reason that we're doing this is let's pretend that we're going to be talking to someone who doesn't know anything about seed. And they ask us, well, what is a seed? What would you say? Yes. Or why do plants make seed? So put your answers in the chat box. A seed is a future plant in a tiny package. A seed is the keeper of life. To reproduce. A seed is a baby plant. Like humans who have a life process, seeds are the future. Plants make seeds to spread their seeds. Life to make more plants. A seed is something that holds life. All these things, every single one of these answers is just perfect because they grow from them. A seed is a plant that hasn't started growing yet. Plants make seeds to support the plant, to pass on information through their genes, ancestral knowledge. A seed is a new beginning of life. So it sounds like we have a really good idea of what a seed is. And so this story that I'm going to tell starts a really, really long time ago. In fact, it starts about 12,000 years ago. So if we go back 12,000 years to 10,000 BC, or before the Common Era, the Earth looked really, really different than it does today. So what had been happening in 10,000 BC was there had been a really, really long ice age, and the world had been covered with ice and snow, especially in the Northern Hemisphere, all the way down through New York, down to the middle of the country. And so all of the ancient indigenous peoples that lived on the North American continent, during that long ice age, they had all been moving further south because they were looking for food and they were looking for shelter where it was warmer. So I'd like you to answer a question now. I'll put it in the chat box, but I'll also tell you. So in 10,000 BC, human beings were not saving seed, they were not planting seed, and they were not growing those crops up and eating those plants. So what do you think people were eating before they were eating plants that they grew? What were they eating? They were eating animals. They were foraging for plants, animals, raw meat, foraging, whatever they could find, berries, bark, haha, foraging for edible plants, bugs. Okay, so we kind of know these early people that were living there, fish, animals, absolutely. Before we were planting seeds and growing plants and eating those plants, we were hunters and gatherers of food. And so I went back and looked at like what year, when about was it that fire started with the human beings? And so that goes back like 1.5 million years. So by 10,000 BC, we were modern humans and we had fire. And so we could possibly be cooking bugs, fish, animals, insects. And we would be gathering berries and bark and roots and all of those things. So about 10,000 BC, something began to happen that was really, really different. After this long, long ice age, the weather started to warm up. And for 3,000 years, the weather warmed up and it got warmer and warmer and warmer till about 7,000 BC. And during that time, the people that had been living down in the southern part of the North American continent or in the Asian continent, they began moving north. And as the ice and the snow thawed from the earth, seeds started to germinate, plants started to grow, trees started to grow. And so over thousands of years, these people were coming up into a landscape that was basically unfamiliar to them. And so they were experimenting with plants. Can we eat this plant? Can we eat that fruit? Can we eat that seed? What can we eat that's here? And so at some point, and of course we don't know exactly when that was, but from the knowledge that we have of the origins of plants, there's about 10 different places on the earth where plants arose, where seed arose. They're called the centers of origin. And so in these 10 places around the earth, very keen observers, just like all of you, they were keen observers of nature. They started watching and seeing that when a seed pod opened and the seeds fell down to the earth, these seeds would pop up and become little plants that were just like the makua, their mother. And so at some point, the astute observers realized that they could take that seed and they could plant it. Because up to this time, people were not living in villages. They were nomadic. So what does that word mean, nomadic? Did you put that in the chat box? What does the word nomadic mean? Wandering, to roam around, not have a home, wandering around, on the move. Okay, moving from place to place, probably for foods, following food sources, not really in a group. Moving around from place to place, following natural patterns. Purposeful migration. So people had been living in probably small family groups at that time. And they were nomadic. They were wandering, just as you say. They were moving about from place to place, looking for animals or plants that they could recognize, that they could eat. And so when whoever these people were all over the world that first discovered, oh, look, the seed falls from this plant and the baby comes up and it's just like the makua. And I can take this seed and I can put it in the ground. That was a turning point for the human beings. Because really, seed had been around for millions of years. Plants had been making seed for millions of years. And in 10,000 BC, the modern humans had only been there probably a couple 100,000. So the seeds have been our teachers, really. And the seeds have changed us, and we have changed them. So one of the ways that seeds changed us is that when people realized that they could take these seeds and plant them, and the plants could come up and they could eat those seeds, or they could grind them, add water to them, make kind of a meal, a mush, and cook that. That meant that they had to stop wandering. They had to stop being nomadic. And they had to stop long enough for the plants to grow and to harvest. And so this is a really, really big change for the human being. And it pretty much came directly from the seed. So the seed got us to stop wandering and stay in one place and create a village and create an extended family and start growing plants for food. And so that was probably around 7,000 BC. Because if you look at the centers of origin of all the world's crops, the grains that come from the Middle East, Egypt, and Iraq, Iran, all of those places, that's where the first grains started coming from, and they were all wild plants. So there was wild wheat, wild barley, wild, all kinds of different grains. And then the interaction of the people and those seeds of planting them, watching them grow up, selecting the best from the best plants, saving them for the next planting. This was a really, really big change. And this started happening everywhere. So the grains came from the Middle East, the beans came from South America, rice came from Asia. And so over thousands and thousands and thousands of years, people in all these different areas began growing different varieties and creating stronger varieties and more resilient varieties of those plants that were around them. So every single plant that we eat today, when you walk into a supermarket and you look at all those fruits and vegetables that are in the produce section, every single one of those was a wild plant at one time. Every one of them. And these really keen observers that were farmers and gardeners, they took those seeds of those plants and worked with them over thousands of years. They passed them on to their children and their grandchildren. They shared them with their neighbors, and then they moved around and they went to a new place where they brought their seeds. You know, that's one of the reasons that the United States had so much seed in the 1900s, was that the early people who came from all over the world to immigrate into the United States, they all brought their seeds with them. So now people are living in villages. They're not wandering around too much anymore. They're hunting, certainly, fishing, certainly, adding that to the foods that they eat. And learning how to prepare and eat the foods that are around them. And these foods would be planted right around their village. They wouldn't be planted far away. They would be planted close so that they could keep an eye on them and they could watch them, gather seed at the right time. And then they had to learn how to save seeds. I know I once read a study where these archaeologists found seed that was in a clay pot in caves that was like 5,000 years old, and it germinated. That seems a little far-fetched to me, but people long ago, they can date the seed, they knew it was 5,000 years old, and it was kept in this dry pot in a dry place, and so it germinated. So people not only had to learn how to select plants and grow plants, they also had to learn how to save that seed for the next planting. And so maybe they didn't save it for very long. Maybe they just harvested their seed and they replanted it right away. Something like that. So to just summarize this part, this has been a really big change for the human being. As seed arises, that is also the beginning of agriculture. And this word agriculture, does anyone know what that word means? Like if you break down that word into the two parts, agri and culture, what does that mean? To grow plants, farming. Yes. So the word agri means soil, and culture is people. So agriculture is the soil of the people cultivating in soil. And so the beginning of seed saving is also the beginning of agriculture, because agriculture didn't start until people started planting that seed, growing that plant up, harvesting it, and eating it. And, as the earth began to warm up 10,000 BC, it continued warming and warming and warming and warming for a really long time. And then between, let's say, 8,000 BC and now, there were times when it got really cold again, but only for brief periods of time. And then the weather would begin to warm up again. So we're not really sure where we are right now, because we live in a world right now where the human beings have changed the climate and the environment quite a bit with what we have been doing through what we have been putting into the air and the water and the soil. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. I don't think I'll be around to watch the end of this one, but it will be interesting to see if the human influence on the environment has changed these big cycles that we have. We've had 5 huge ice age periods with what they call interglacial warming in between that lasts 10, 11,000 years. And we're in one of those warming periods right now. Thank goodness, right? So another thing happened about 500 BC. I mean, 500 AD. So AD meaning the Common Era, after 500 years after the year 0. And that is that the Polynesians came to Hawaii in their canoes. And most likely, they already knew that Hawaii was here, and they were coming, and they didn't come empty-handed. They came with food to help them through their first years, and they also came with their canoe plants. So I am going to put a link in the chat box, and And I would like you to click on this link and take a look at the take a look at that list of canoe crops that comes up. This is on the Edible Hawaiian Islands site. Can everybody see this? So you have to just scroll down just a tiny little bit. And you can see that there were somewhere around 24, 25 different crops that the Polynesians brought with them to Hawaii when they came. And I'd like you to look down through this list of crops and put in the chat box, which one of these crops do you think they brought seed from? The kind of seed that we're talking about, which is hard seed that you can bring easily in a canoe. And which, well, let's just start with that. Do you see any crops there that you think might have been grown from seed? The kind of seed that we've just been talking about. The coconuts, absolutely. Kukui, yes. Ipu, yes. Ko, probably. Yeah. All right. My early varieties, hard to eat. Ipu, Ipu. So the Ipu was a pretty amazing plant because, I mean, the Ipu had the seeds inside of it that were all safe and protected and dry until it was time to plant. So they could put it on their canoes, they could bring it across the ocean, and those seeds were not going to deteriorate because of moisture, which is something that seeds don't like unless they want to germinate. But I want you to think about something different now, is that all of the plants on this list, every single one of them is a different type of seed. It's all seed. And it's called vegetative propagation. So a lot of these plants were grown from their keiki. Could you put in the chat box which one of those plants you know was grown from keiki? Kalo, for sure. Ki, yes. The tea, the ava, Maya. Is Ulu on this list? I'm sorry, I don't have that up on my screen right now. No, okay.
And Uala's missing too. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. So early, early peoples who migrated to Hawaii, the Polynesians, they might not have brought all of the crops that they had later, because, by 1500, there was another migration of Tahitians, and they could have brought other crops with them too. So this huli of my taro plant, my moi taro plant, this is seed. It's just the same kind of seed that we were just talking about this morning, only it's a vegetative propagated seed. And I'd like you to start thinking about all of these things as seed. Everything is seed. Anything that can produce a new plant is seed. So one of the stories of the Hawaiian stories is the story of Haloa. Is there someone on today who would like to give a short version of that story? How about Alani? Can you do that?
Sure. Can everybody hear me? Is my mic on?
Yes.
Okay. And so what I know of the story is that our Earth Mother and Sky Father had a baby. Her name was Ho'ohoku Kalani. And I believe the next part of that story is the daughter, Ho'ohoku Kalani, and the father make a baby. And the first baby is a stillborn. And his name was Haloa Naka Laukapalili. And they buried that stillborn next to their home. And out came up a kalo plant. And then they had another baby, and they named him Haloa, and he lived to be the first man. And so we relate our genealogy all the way back to Haloa Naka Laukapalili as being the firstborn, and his younger brother Haloa, who have a reciprocal relationship of taking care of each other. And when the older brother takes care of the younger brother takes care of the older brother, they both get fed, and they both have all the kalo we believe is coming from Haloa Naka Laukapalili. It's the shortest version I know.
No, mahalo, Aulani. Yeah, so many people around the world have like a creation story like that one. That what comes is the plant, and then the people come after that. The plant comes to feed the people, and then the people can come also. And it's the same with the corn people. People who live in South America, Mexico, Central America, their story is not exactly like that, but it's the same. First came the teosinte, the wild corn. And from that wild corn, those people who were picking it and trying to eat it and replant it over thousands of years, they developed all of those corn varieties. So the corn is the older brother of all of those people from the southern South America, Central America, and Mexico. Exactly the same. And I'm sure if we looked around the world, we could find stories like this of plants and people, how they came together, the plant first and then the people. Yeah. So I see it's already 10 o'clock. Boy, that went fast. I was wondering if any of you, because I asked you this question, did any of you talk to your family and ask them if they knew of a seed story that might have come from one of your ancestors? Is there anyone who had a seed story? No, I see Eva says no. No seed stories? Okay, I'm going to tell you a seed story from my farm. A long time ago, maybe a couple hundred years ago, my neighbor who lives right next to me, her grandfather came to Hawaii from Japan. And he lived in Japan, and he had a persimmon that was a fruit that he loved. And so when he immigrated to Hawaii, he brought 4 seeds in his pocket of that persimmon. And he planted it in his yard, and it grew up. And the first generation finally died many years later. And he took a seed, and his ancestors then, not his ancestors, but his children then took the seeds and they planted them, and then that tree grew up. And so one day I was over there and I asked them if I could have a seed of that. And she gave me a seed. And so I have a big persimmon tree in my garden that's, I wish I could show you, but I think that would be difficult. But it's still fruiting right now. It still has a little bit of fruit on it. And so this tree goes right back to Aiko's great grandfather, who came here from Japan many, many years ago to work in Hawaii. And I bet, and I'm sure that every single one of you, every one of you has an ancestors that grew food and saved seed. every one of you. And you may not know them, and you may not know what they did or who they were, but that knowledge flows down through DNA into you. And when you start reconnecting with plants and seeds and growing, those stories may come up in you, or you may hear them from your ancestors. It's possible. So I hope that while we were talking, you were listening for some of the reasons why it's important to save seed. So let's just take one more minute here and put into the chat box, put a reason that you think is the most important reason why it's important to save seed today. So we can have food for sure. We can have food for tomorrow, for future generations. We can save money. We don't have to keep buying food from the store. Future crops, increasing biodiversity. We can have food to help the environment and preserve our native plant species. We can grow food from seeds and can have a more secure food security. We lose less money to preserve the past, to reproduce. Land races, crops adapted to our land. Diversity, taking care of the earth, our human duty. Healthier lifestyle, sustainability. Malama the Honua, to take care of the planet. Resource security, wood for fire and building. Boy, I think you really got all of them. Resource security. My school is called Malama Honua. Oh yeah, Malama Honua. Mm-hmm. Protecting endangered species and plants. Yeah, I really think you touched upon all of the, I looked down at my list that I made, and every one is on my list is up here. So I think one of the things that you'll be asked after this session is over, to just list 3 reasons that you think it's important to save seeds today. And you can use any of these answers, the ones that resonate with you the most. And I think just to end this, and this is for the little ones who are here. If you're still here, little ones, I want to read a verse that talks about who we are and how important it is to be part of nature. We feel by the moon, we move by the stars, we eat from the earth, we drink from the rain, we breathe of the air, we live in all things, and all things live in us. So mahalo for joining our first activity today. And let's see if I missed anything here. Meet our 5 needs: food, water, shelter, air, and clothing. Connecting our keiki to the natural cycles of plants and providing a sense of responsibility and love for our Mother Earth. Community engagement in restoring ecological diversity. All right. Mahalo for participating in our first activity today, and I'm going to pass this off to Tyler.
Wow, Nancy, I'm speechless. Thank you. Like, mahalo. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing this ancient wisdom with us all. And we hope that now, of course, you can plant these seeds of love and eternal wisdom within your heart, within your souls and minds, and grow them in your garden. And pass them on to the next generation, of course. So
Seeds have changed us, and we have been changed by seed.
yes, yes.
Bottom line.
So we're now gonna transition into a short 5-minute break. Feel free to stretch, get water, get something to eat, so on, whatever else you need to do. And we'll see you back in 5 minutes or so to kick off the second half of this wonderful workshop. And again, no words can even express my thanks and gratitude for you, Nancy. Thank
Oh, Tyler.
you. And Eolani, thank you for sharing that story of Haloa. See you guys in 5 minutes.